Okay, so if you live in Connecticut, you've probably heard about this. All of a sudden, your town has these new housing targets, and they seem to have just appeared out of thin air. It feels very top-down, and it's got a lot of folks scratching their heads, asking one really simple question.
So where are these numbers actually coming from? That's what we're going to figure out. We're going to follow the breadcrumbs, trace these housing targets all the way back to their source, step by step. And look, this is all about documented facts. No guesswork, no speculation. All right, let's dive in.
Okay, the most obvious place to start is, the law. We're talking about Public Act 25-1. This is the piece of legislation that gets this whole ball rolling. But, and this is a big but, there's something you gotta understand right from the get-go.
See, the law itself is really just a procedural manual. It's a how-to guide, not a why guide. It tells you all about the mechanics, how the numbers get crunched, who's in charge of what. But it never really explains the philosophy behind it all. It sets up a system, but it doesn't justify it. So to really get the why, we've got to look beyond the legislature.
So if the law doesn't explain the why, then where did these ideas come from? Well, it turns out the blueprint for all this existed way before any law was passed. And these ideas, they weren't bubbling up from local towns.
This is where we meet the key framers. We're talking about two main groups, Desegregate Connecticut and the Regional Plan Association, or RPA. Now, it's really important to note, these are non-governmental advocacy organizations, NGOs. They are not government agencies, and it's their philosophy that really forms the core of this whole policy.
And you can really see their thinking in this quote right from Desegregate Connecticut. They say, sprawl is out. Car-dependent, low-density, single-use zoning raises costs, harms the environment, and perpetuates segregation. Whoa. So right away, you see this isn't just about building a few more affordable units. The goal is way bigger. It's about a fundamental shift in how Connecticut uses its land, getting away from what they call sprawl.
Okay, so what does ending sprawl mean in practice? It's not about just stopping growth altogether. It's about redirecting it. The framework is designed to steer development away from lower-density towns and push it toward areas that already have what they call capacity, things like transit hubs, existing multifamily housing, and so on. This is a redistribution framework. It's not neutral. It's a very specific vision for where growth should and shouldn't happen.
And this brings us to a really important point that often gets lost in the conversation. Not all towns are treated the same under this framework. The higher population municipalities, about 20 of them, that already have most of the state's affordable housing, well, their obligations are structured differently. This leaves many smaller and suburban towns, some with very limited infrastructure, suddenly being assigned these new significant growth expectations.
All right, so we've got the philosophy, the big idea, coming from these NGOs. Now we get to the next part of the puzzle. How does that big idea turn into a hard number for your town? This is where we enter the state's engine room, where the plan gets put into action.
The first stop is the Office of Policy and Management, or OPM. Their role is absolutely critical. OPM is responsible for determining the regional affordable housing need. They're the ones setting the baseline numbers for the entire state, and they issue guidance that the regional councils must follow. So they're way upstream in this process.
From OPM, the numbers then go to the councils of government. You'll hear them called COGs. Now, what are COGs? They're regional planning bodies. They are not elected legislatures. Their job is to take those big picture goals from OPM and translate them into specific municipal fair share housing targets. This is the moment where a state-level goal becomes a local assignment.
And you can see here how Connecticut is broken up into these 9 councils of governments. Every single town in the state belongs to one. This is often the first place where local officials actually encounter this policy, right at the COG level, after a lot of the big picture thinking has already been locked in.
Okay, let's take a step back and look at the full picture. We've seen all the pieces, so now we can map out the entire policy pipeline, from start to finish.
Here it is, the full chain, from idea to mandate. Step 1, NGOs develop a land use philosophy. Step 2, that framework gets woven into legislative language. Step 3, the state law is passed, establishing the process. Step 4, the OPM sets the big regional housing metrics. Step 5, the COGs take those metrics and allocate them out to individual towns. And finally, Step 6, towns are required to align their policies with these new targets. That's the whole sequence.
So, why go through all this? Why does it matter? Because once you understand the process, you're empowered. You can ask the right questions, you can see past the simple talking points.
Look, understanding this process isn't about picking a side, for or against. It's about being equipped to ask better questions about governance. It's about being able to have a more informed, productive conversation.
So what are those questions? Well, things like, who actually decided on this framework? Why were these specific criteria chosen to begin with? Why are some towns treated differently than others? What are the assumptions baked into the numbers we're being given? And, maybe the biggest one, how much discretion do our towns actually retain in this process? These are the kinds of questions that get to the heart of how this all works.
So there you have it. The origin, the philosophy, the whole structure. Now you can see how we got from A to B. And knowing all this, the conversation in your community can really change. It can move beyond slogans and get into the substance of accountability and transparency. So the real question is, what's the next conversation your community should have?